My name is Chuck Meyer. I am a senior developer advocate for AWS CloudFormation. And I'm here to do a deep dive on CloudFormation. So this is not an intro level class. We're going to actually be talking a lot about sort of some of the deeper features of CloudFormation across a number of different topics. I'll do a brief overview at the beginning, but the expectation is that you're at least familiar with CloudFormation. You've seen a couple templates. You know generally how it works. Let's see here. Big button, got it. A little bit about myself. I've been at AWS for just under 5 years. It'll be 5 years in July. As I said, I'm a senior developer advocate right now. That means that I am a direct conduit between the developer community and the CloudFormation service team. I am your punching bag. I am your Sherpa. I am whatever I can do to make your life easier as you're using CloudFormation. Before that, I spent a long time out in the field in professional services, and also as a solution architect. But enough about me. We have a lot to cover today. I will confess I've over-indexed on content, so I apologize if I go a little bit fast, but there was a lot of things I wanted to tell you about. I will try and make sure that I don't go too fast so that you can actually kind of digest it a little bit. The things that we're going to talk about are aligned to 4 basic learning areas. So we're going to be talking a little bit about how to protect your stacks, right? How to sort of put in guardrails to monitor them, to make sure that you've operationalized them well. We're also going to be talking about working at scale, multi-region, multi-account type architectures, some features within CloudFormation that can help you out with that. And then we're going to talk a little bit about sort of the development side of things, the authoring, the testing, all of that sort of aspect of it, really treating infrastructure as code. And hopefully at the very end, I'll have enough time we can talk a little bit about serverless and deploying serverless through CloudFormation. So again, those are the learning areas. It's across these 4 major themes. Guardrails is the main one. I think the important thing to notice is that we've got 2 icons there for guardrails, right? We're not just talking about how to lock things down. We're going to talk about how to look at things as well. Both of those are critical. Working at scale, working as developers of CloudFormation, of infrastructure as code, and then, of course, serverless. So just to fill in any gaps, if you're relatively new to CloudFormation, CloudFormation is AWS's infrastructure as a code service. So it's a service that we manage for you. It allows you to essentially author templates in JSON or YAML. You can author them yourself. You can use third-party tools to generate them. You can use pre-generated templates that are available through the community. But at the end of the day, you take those templates, you push those up into an S3 bucket, or you push those up through an API call to the CloudFormation service, and then we use those templates to provision infrastructure on your behalf within an abstracted construct we call a stack. Right? So within that construct of a stack, we manage state information for you. We help sort of make sure that things are provisioned in the appropriate order. We make sure that things stabilize appropriately. We can handle rollbacks for you under certain circumstances if things go wrong as you're doing updates. But at the end of the day, you're sort of using CloudFormation to manage that infrastructure across its life cycle. So that's it. Now you know everything about CloudFormation. This is my one marketing slide. I promise it won't be very marketing-y, but I just wanted to kind of give you a few facts. These were some facts that we sort of talked about at reInvent. CloudFormation is one of the more popular services within the platform. We had, as of November, over 350,000 active users. This is my favorite statistic. So of our large spenders, the folks with sort of large complex infrastructure on AWS, 75% of them are using CloudFormation to some extent to manage those resources. So customers are realizing that as infrastructure gets more complicated, as you're not just going and launching a couple of EC2 instances and managing a few S3 buckets, you need something to sort of help you automate that process and have visibility into it. And CloudFormation seems to be a tool that a lot of customers like. And because of that, we manage a lot of stacks. We had 2.4 million active stacks and growing as of November. So that's it. That's the marketing side. You've got some stats now. Now we can dig into our themes. This is the big one. This is the one I'm going to be spending the most time on. We're going to be talking about guardrails, right? So you've got your infrastructure as code. What can you do to protect that? What can you do to operationalize that? And CloudFormation has a number of features to really facilitate that. And they split across sort of 2 different areas, right? The sort of protective guardrails where you are maybe denying access to do something, right, or sort of putting in some guardrails to make sure that certain things happen under certain events. And then there's the monitoring guardrails, right? As customers are moving more towards the trust but verify model, right, where you're allowing your developers or your customers to be a little bit more flexible in what they can do on the platform, you need to make sure that you have the appropriate visibility on the backside so that when they inevitably do something wrong, you can have that conversation with them about it. So first we're going to be talking a little bit more about those protective guardrails. And we're going to talk about 4 different ones. And these are kind of in a scale from the most coarse to the most granular here. We're going to talk about locking the full stack, checkbox locking. I guess the first thing I should do, just kind of as I drill into this, I usually try and take a little bit of a survey. I'm going to make an assumption that a majority of folks are using CloudFormation. So I'm going to ask the reverse question. Who in this room, try and be honest, is maybe just thinking about using CloudFormation or has just started dabbling with it? Okay, that's reasonable, that's reasonable. I'll try to fill in some gaps here. Sorry that it's sort of, we breezed through the beginnings of it, but hopefully you'll remember some of these features and you'll be able to use them. Who is using CloudFormation has started using termination protection? A couple folks. Okay, so this is a really cool feature. We will talk about that. Getting a little bit more granular, we're going to talk about stack level policies, right, which is sort of resource permissions that you can do against a specific stack. We're going to drill in a little bit further and talk about some of the permissions that you can put down in the individual resources. And then, of course, underneath all of this is IAM, right? IAM is sort of your ground level baseline of how you handle who can do what on AWS. Okay, so stack termination protection. This was a feature that we launched last year. Who here has used termination protection for EC2? Okay, very similar concept. This is literally a checkbox that you can set when you create or update a stack. It has its own API call that says, don't delete this. This is important, right? So this is a very useful tool for stacks that include stateful resources, RDS databases, critical S3 buckets, right? DynamoDBs, things that if you lost it, there would be problems, bind servers. So this is a very useful, just very simple one-click operation, one API call operation that allows you to put an additional layer of protection into your stack. Now the important thing here is this is to protect from deletion within CloudFormation. This is if I say delete stack, it says, nope, you've got termination protection on, you have to go turn that off first, right? This is not preventing someone from going in and deleting that database out of band. So that's an important piece of this, just to think about. These first 3 controls are all going to be within CloudFormation itself. So this is what it looks like. This is how you can actually evaluate the termination protection is on. You get this nice little lock icon when you go look at the stack in the console. You can also see that when you do a describe on the stack itself. So you can check to make sure that you do have this lock in place. If you're having trouble deleting something, you can also check that to make sure, oh, I forgot to turn that off. So moving into sort of the second control here, stack level policies. So this is a policy document that you can actually author alongside the stack itself and apply when you create the stack. And this sets a permission specific to that stack, right? So regardless of what sort of IAM permissions an individual has, when they go to do an update against this stack, these permissions will be overlaid on top of it. So this particular stack policy, you can see what it's doing, is it is allowing updates to the stack, but not for our RDS databases, right? Again, our stateful resources we want to be a little bit more cautious of. So you can take these policies, you can apply them as you create the stacks. Obviously, if you're creating your stacks in an automated fashion, there's an opportunity to inject that sort of as a baseline, right, as you create the stack. Or you can sort of custom craft these and make sure that they're provisioned alongside the stacks themselves. So that's the sort of the second guardrail available. The third guardrail is resource level policies. So again, talking a lot about our stateful resources, right, our RDS databases, our EBS volumes. A lot of these resources have properties that allow you to control what happens if that resource is deleted. And that's another thing that we want to be very aware of, and we want to be cognizant that we're using them. So in this particular case, we can see This is a EC2 volume, so we've got an EBS volume that we've created. And we have an opportunity here, as we create the volume, to describe what we want to have happen if this volume is deleted. In this case, we want to make sure that we always take a snapshot so we've got something to show our auditors. Right? So these types of controls, very good to be aware of what is available and when to use them. And again, it's going to be your stateful resources that are going to have these types of attributes. And then, of course, the granddaddy of them all, IAM. Now, as I said earlier, and as I'm going to kind of re-stress, the first three controls are all controls within the context of CloudFormation. Right? So if you are managing all of your resources through CloudFormation, or you have very good practices where changes are all made using some sort of automated system, those are going to be excellent controls, but they don't protect you from those out-of-band changes. That's where you still need to have good IAM hygiene. Now, CloudFormation itself is a first-class resource within IAM, and you have an opportunity to build good policy around CloudFormation as well. Right? So in this case, you can see this is a fairly granular policy where we are building some permissions around the ability to create stacks. And we're saying that we're not actually going to allow you to create stacks if they contain IAM resources. Right? We want to manage those IAM resources through some sort of other process or governance agency. So we're going to allow you to provision resources, but not IAM resources. You have to come talk to us for that. So IAM is going to be foundational. I'm sure you hear that a lot. I saw out there CloudFormation is getting mentioned a lot here, but nothing beats IAM when it comes to what gets talked about at these conferences. So good IAM hygiene is just as important with CloudFormation as it is anywhere else in your organization. Okay, so that's sort of the protective side of things. Now I want to talk a little bit more about monitoring. And this first one is the one I'm probably going to spend the most amount of time talking about. Which is drift. And we announced at reInvent that we're working on a new feature for CloudFormation that will assist you with drift. So we're going to talk a little bit about what we mean when we say drift. And I'm going to hopefully be able to show you a little bit of a demo of what we're working on to sort of help you out with that. But drift isn't the only thing that we're concerned about here. We also want to be thinking about the health of our application across the board. As customers, more and more customers start using CloudFormation to deploy more than just baseline infrastructure, they start to deploy critical data layer resources. They start to deploy full applications, full stack applications using CloudFormation. Sometimes just making sure that your resources have normalized isn't enough. So we're going to talk a little bit about some tools that are available to help you with sort of monitoring beyond just the resources. And audit. This is a public sector summit, so audit and compliance is a critical piece of everything we do. So making sure that we've got a good audit trail for CloudFormation is critical, and I'm going to talk about some of the new things that we've done integrating with config. But first thing we're going to talk about is drift, right? So you are totally sold on CloudFormation. You've got really good automated processes. Everything's getting deployed through CloudFormation. You've got all of your developers are pushing stuff up into repositories. Everything is going well. And then one night you have a Sev 1, right? And you can't get a hold of the developer, and you know what needs to be changed. And someone says, just go into the console, let's fix it, let's get ourselves up and running, and we'll figure it out later, right? It happens. People get access to the console. People are trying out different things. Inevitably, something happens out of band, hopefully in case of an emergency. So what happens in these cases? Well, as I said at the outset, CloudFormation, one of the things that it does, one of the things that our customers like about it, is it's a managed service. So when you deploy a stack, we maintain state information for you. We maintain the state of those resources. But we maintain that state against the last template that we applied. Right? So all of our information is basically based on the last create stack or update stack that you did. So historically, CloudFormation was not aware of any changes that happened after that last update. And that's what we call drift. Right? So drift is any change to a resource that is typically managed by CloudFormation that's occurred out of band. Right? And that causes drift in the stack. So that could be changing a property value of a resource. That could be taking a resource that was created with a default value and realizing that you don't like the default and updating that to a specific value. And it could be you've deleted a resource or someone has deleted a resource out of band. And so that causes this drift. And now the values that are actually live don't match up with what we had asked for, what was in the template, what was in the parameters. And there are ramifications to this. The next time that your automated process goes and tries to do an update to that stack, it might not be able to. Maybe IAM permissions have changed. Maybe a resource is not available that it was expecting to be there, right? And so now all of a sudden you have to go and you have to troubleshoot that. Your operations folks have to get on the phone. Someone has to figure it out. You have to get things back into a state where you can continue forward with your automated process. And of course, from a compliance perspective, this is a nightmare. If you're using your infrastructure as code as part of your compliance strategy, and you're using it to demonstrate that you are checking all the boxes or fulfilling all of your fiduciary requirements or whatever it is, if your state deviates from that, we've got problems, right? We've got to have a conversation with the auditors. So in both these cases, it's critical to be able to catch these out-of-band changes. And that's where this drift detection service came from. So again, it's still in process. The intention is to release it this year. We've been working very hard with our beta partners to kind of make sure that we've got it set up appropriately. But it will be available across all commercial regions. And of course, I'll be driving hard to get it in GovCloud as well. I want to show you what it looks like. So I'm going to switch over to my laptop here. Okay. Here we go. Make that a little bit bigger because I'm in my 40s and I know what it's like. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a stack. In this stack, let me do this real quick. Okay, this stack is very, very simple. It basically has only 2 resources in it. It has an SQS queue and a Dynamo table. Okay. Now, when I go over into the console, do a refresh here, you can see that my console has a new column in it called drift status. And at this point, my stack is still creating, and my drift status is not checked. So we're going to give that a second. I'm going to grab my next command here real quick. Okay, so right now we're sitting in not checked. Now, currently, as it's going to be released, drift detection is an active process. So we're not going to be dynamically monitoring your stacks in the background. You need to make an API call to us to say, hey, I want you to check the drift on this particular stack. So detect drift on current stack. We run a drift detection. And of course, because we haven't changed anything since we created it, our expectation is that it will show up as in sync, which it does. So great. So now we are in sync. So let's go break some stuff. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go get my event table here. We'll look at it over here. So you can see this table right now. We've got the default, we've actually got a read capacity and a write capacity of 20. And now we're having some sort of event, and we need to make an out-of-band change to increase that. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to place my table line. We're going to increase that to 50. Okay, so we'll let that go. Make sure we pick that up. The joy of live demos. And then I'm going to go over here. We'll go ahead and do another drift detection on it. We'll see what happens. Okay, so now we can see that our stack has drifted. So doing a refresh here, I see the drifted here. And now I have an opportunity to drill into that stack and actually look at that drift report. So I can say view details. And what I get here is I get a special page just for this particular drift report. So remember, this is not dynamic. This was point in time from when I said to detect drift. And what it's telling me is that while my event queue is still in sync, there has been a modification to my DynamoDB table. And drilling into that, I can see sort of a diff of the configuration on both. And I can kind of highlight what those differences are. So I can see, oh, looks like someone changed the read capacity here on me. So now that drift has been detected, I have an opportunity to go and remediate. So I'm going to go and say, what are you doing? I had that set to 20 for a reason. Do you have any idea how long it took us to do that load testing? So now we're in the process of getting that sort of back up to where it should be. I can go back out here to my stacks. I could have done it right there as well. Let's see, and we'll run one last detection event. And now we're back in sync. And refreshing here, we're back in sync there as well. So that's generally how it works. I'll show you one last thing, which is what happens when someone does the unthinkable and goes and deletes our database. Well, the one thing I want to emphasize here, though, is that this is drift detection. So what we can do we can tell you that you've drifted, and we can tell you that the reason that you've drifted is because someone deleted your database. Unfortunately, we can't bring it back. So hopefully you're still doing best practices and taking snapshots and you have the ability to restore. But at the very least, this is a powerful tool for your operations folks to be able to troubleshoot and find out exactly what happened and quickly be able to identify a change and start making plans about how you're going to resolve it. So that's drift detection. At reInvent, we said early 2018. It's June now, so early is getting a little long in the tooth, but we are working to get it out to you this year. And again, we'll be across all commercial regions, and hopefully GovCloud will follow soon after. Okay, so that's drift. Let's move back into our slides. Okay, so remember we were in the middle of talking about monitoring controls. Drift was kind of the main one I wanted to show you, but I did want to talk about a couple of other ones. This is one that I think is pretty cool. I actually wrote a blog post about this last year. This is rollback triggers. So the concept here, for folks that have used CloudFormation, you're aware that one of the things that CloudFormation does is if you do an update to a resource that causes it to destabilize, right, that causes it to come up in a state where it's not able to handle requests, CloudFormation can roll that change back. Right? So CloudFormation can go back to the last good state that it knows about and try and get you back up and running. But that's based on essentially normalization of individual resources. What rollback triggers allows you to do is it allows you to extend that rollback capability to CloudWatch alarms. So alongside all of the regular stabilization that occurs, you can actually define a rollback trigger. And within that rollback trigger, you can tell CloudFormation what metric or alarm to monitor and how long to monitor it for. Right? So in this particular case, we're saying, even if all of my resources come up and are stable, I want you to hang out for another 10 minutes and monitor this alarm on an SQS queue depth to make sure that my application is still, in fact, handling all of the things coming in through my batch service. Right? So make sure that my change didn't actually impact my ability to handle the demand. And then once you have that rollback trigger in place, you can apply that to the stack as part of the API call when you do a create or update event. And so this is what it looks like in practice. So once the rollback trigger is in place, you can see here that we've gone to do an update. In this case, it looks like it's a container cluster, ECS container cluster. And again, we have a rollback trigger tied to our queue depth. So as we were hanging out, waiting to see what our change does, we exceeded our threshold on our alarm in CloudWatch, which caused CloudFormation to say, oh, that didn't do what we expected it to do, and immediately roll back whatever that change was to the last good state. So this is very powerful if you're starting to sort of move up the stack of infrastructure as code, and you're starting to sort of make CloudFormation a little bit more of an intrinsic piece of your application level management structure, right, as opposed to just deploying some resources and then moving on. Okay, and the last monitoring control I wanted to talk about was our config integration. So this is another thing that we added last year. CloudFormation is now a first-class resource within config. For folks that haven't used config, config is our state management monitoring service. It essentially allows you to track changes to resources over time and receive notifications on those. You also have an opportunity to plug rules into config, so you can actually be monitoring for specific settings, specific changes, and notify on those. And CloudFormation is now integrated into that. So you are able to track both the current state and historical state on your stacks and get notifications when people make changes to critical pieces of infrastructure. So again, great auditing tool here. Sorry that the text is a little too much there, but this is a snapshot of what a CloudFormation stack looks like within config. So this is the timeline view, if you're familiar with that within config. And you can see that what we've got here is a CloudFormation stack that was created all the way back at reInvent. So this is an old slide. But on November 19th, 2017, 147, we created this stack. Then we did an update. And you can see there was one update event, but it made 7 changes within the stack. Right? So that's critical. It's not just telling you that, hey, there was some sort of update to your stack. It's actually telling you that the changes that occurred because of that and tracks that over time until we get to this last event at, it looks like 210, right, with 3 changes in it. And then if we look down in the details, you can actually kind of get some information about that specific event. Now, the critical piece of this, pretend this isn't just a picture and this is actually the web page, and we scroll down, there's actually a changes section where you can grow and drill in and see the actual changes that occurred within that stack as part of that event. So again, in this case, what we're seeing is that we initially had a bunch of configuration around a DynamoDB table that is now missing. And if we look down to the relationships, it's because someone has deleted the DynamoDB table. So someone has modified the template to remove that DynamoDB table. And again, from an operational perspective, now at least we have the information we need to go and have the conversations that we have to have with the appropriate individuals. So that's the config integration. The last piece is because config is now available from CloudFormation, you have the opportunity to write rules against your CloudFormation stacks. So we actually do have one managed rule already out there. This is around CloudFormation has the ability to tie an SNS topic to a stack so that you actually can get notifications when the stack changes. This is a rule for enforcing that to make sure that all of your end users of CloudFormation are actually using that and setting up their topics and making sure that they're getting the appropriate information from them. So that's one theme. I promise you that was the longest one. But I do want to touch on these last 3, and I do have one more demo that I want to show you. So we're going to try and breeze through this as quickly as we can. Provisioning at scale, right? We've been talking to more and more customers that are using multiple accounts in multiple regions, right? As well as our regions are designed, the multi-AZ architectures, there are reasons for doing this, right? It could be because you have compliance requirements around isolation, right? You have particular pieces of data that you need to ensure are isolated or only accessible by certain folks, and putting an account boundary around that is one way to do it. Also, with data sovereignty laws, there is a lot of reasons to be making sure that you have data in particular regions, right, or that data is not leaving particular regions. So above and beyond that, there are disaster recovery, there are environment isolation, sandboxing, any number of reasons to use these types of environments. So the 2 I wanted to focus in on is one that I think is near and dear to all of our hearts, which is governance, right? So this is, as we start provisioning across multiple accounts, we recognize that there are certain baseline resources that we need everywhere. We want to make sure there's consistency to the way we're deploying our networking components. We might need to make sure that there are some central management tools, logging tools, things that always get deployed and that are deployed in a consistent manner, right? The second piece of that is disaster recovery. So catastrophes happen. As well architected as an AWS region might be, there is still inevitably the chance that a natural disaster or something will require us to move to another region. So maintaining that consistency across regions is critical. Historically, the customers that we've talked to have done this a number of different ways. It often ends up being a run book, right? So someone is actually going and saying, when you do this, also do this. If this happens, this is what we need to do to make sure that we're up and running in our disaster recovery environment. That tends to lead to some homegrown scripts. Maybe someone's writing some stuff with the CLI or building out some code. And there's a lot of third-party tools that this is either their primary task or it's sort of a value added that you get. But across all of those, we recognized that this was a pattern that was sort of emergent, and we wanted to have something within CloudFormation to sort of help with this. And that's why we introduced stack sets. So stack sets is our orchestration tool for deploying CloudFormation stacks across multiple accounts and multiple regions. It is available in the commercial regions, not available in GovCloud yet. I'm working on it. I say that like I'm doing it, but I'm one of the people that goes and talks to the service team and tries to get it in there. The way it works is through IAM permissioning. So you establish one of your accounts as a master account. That's where your stack set will live. And that master account has an IAM role associated with it that will allow it to assume roles within the target accounts, or essentially the target accounts, right? So each of those target accounts needs to have an assumable role set up in it as well. So this is all done through IAM. It's all done in a visible way. It's something that you can look at, something that you can set up, something you have controls over. And the concept is that once you've established that relationship through IAM roles, you can create the stack set, choose a template, and then list the accounts and regions that you wish to deploy into. And then stack sets will go and do those deployments, and will report back within the master account where it was successful and what the success rate was. So you've got a whole new set of essentially CRUD APIs, right, within CloudFormation. So this is still part of the CloudFormation API, but they're specific to stack sets. And then alongside that, you have some additional options. Because it's an orchestration layer, there's some very basic sort of mechanisms for telling stack sets how much concurrency you want, how many of these accounts you want to do in parallel, and your failure tolerance. Are you okay with half of the accounts going into a bad state, or is it awful if even one of them does? So running through a couple of these scenarios, this is the disaster recovery scenario. So the premise here is that you're doing business unit account isolation, right? So each of your business units, each of your customers has their own account. But you want to make sure that as they deploy, they're deploying consistently across multiple regions, so that if there is an event where they need to go to another region, either for DR or perhaps for latency reasons, everything is consistent, right? So the concept here is you push your templates through the stack set in that account, and then stack set will go and actually provision out to each of the regions and report back, giving you that consistency. So every time you do an update, you update at the stack set level, and it gets pushed out to all of the regions. From the governance perspective, all of this is happening from your central management account, right? So you have some sort of account set up, probably where you have most of your management tools in place. That's where your stack set would live. And what you're doing is as new accounts, as new regions come online, you are using your stack set to make sure that the exact same template gets provisioned out every place, right? So across all of these accounts, all of these regions from a single template. And that might contain all of your baseline networking, your IAM, whatever it might be. And the cool thing about this is you have the ability to override parameters here, right? So you have an opportunity to say, in this account, this is a sandbox account, so I'm okay with it being a little bit looser. In these other accounts, I might actually want it to be a little bit tighter. And as you do deployments, you actually have an opportunity to filter and say, this particular stack set deployment I want to do to these accounts and these regions. So you have the ability to do updates to certain subsets, right, if you have something that's only very specific to one. OK, so this is my second demo. Because we're talking about stack sets, there's a lot of stacks being created. I'm not going to do this one live. I'm going to do this one from a video, just to kind of do the magic of television, right, and kind of show some of the things that are going on here. So again, as I said, IAM roles are critical here. Historically, stack sets had 2 roles that were sort of hard-coded that you had to make sure were available in both the master account and in the target accounts. And we did provide some sort of basic CloudFormation templates for deploying those. Now, the good news is you can still use these, but you do also have the option to define your own roles, both at the master level and at the target level. And you can actually specify those as you deploy the stack sets. So it's not reflected in this video, but that is a new sort of feature of stack sets. So in this case, I'm actually using the sort of the predefined roles. I've created them using a CloudFormation template, and I'm verifying that they're actually there. So this is my master account, and then I'm going down into my target account, and I want to make sure that I actually have this set execution role in there too. Right? So execution role is the permissions that I'm going to give you to be able to deploy this stack within whatever the target account is. Okay? And that might be scoped wide for administrative purposes or scoped narrow to a specific role. But the important thing is making sure that that is there. So here I am in my beta account, and I can verify that the role is there as well. Cool, so I've got all of my IAM in place. That's a prereq. You have to have that in place before you can use stack sets. Okay, so now I can actually go and I can create my first stack set. And I'm going to do it in Ohio because I live in Columbus. The important thing here is that stack sets live in parallel to stacks. So you can see I hit the CloudFormation button. There's a drop down. I've got stacks, exports, and stack sets there. That takes me into the first user experience here. And I can create my stack. Now we've got some sort of predefined administrative. This is a lot of stuff around CloudTrail and config. These are predefined templates that you could deploy, or you can upload your own. Right? You can either do it from an S3 bucket. In my case, I'm actually going to just upload one locally. This is my basic VPC template. It's about as basic as you can get. It literally has a VPC, just for speed purposes. I'm going to give my stack set a unique name. So this is for the stack set, not the stacks themselves. And I'm going to fill in my parameter here. Now, this is the parameter directly from the CloudFormation template. Right? So I'm going to fill in all the values based on what was in the template itself. Now I specify my accounts and regions. I can either specify my accounts through an organizational unit, and stack sets will go retrieve all the accounts in that OU and populate that, or I can specify them myself as a list. Once I have my accounts, I specify my regions, and there's an opportunity here to set order, but we'll show you that in a second. I then say how many accounts I want to do at once. I'm only doing one, so it doesn't matter, and my failure tolerance, which is no tolerance at all. So if there's any failure, stack sets will immediately stop doing what it's doing. Okay, so now that takes me to my stack set page. This is my baseline VPC stack set. You can see I've got a section here with operations that shows me that I have an operation in process across multiple stacks. And then it'll show me the list of stacks here at the bottom. So right now I'm generating a stack in one account in one region. It's outdated because it didn't exist before. And it will go and do the provisioning, and it will tell me when that is actually up to snuff, up to what I want it to be. Now I have the opportunity to create additional stacks within the stack set. So again, I can put additional accounts in here. In this case, I'm going to put my Gamma account. So I want to control some stacks within my Gamma account. I'm going to pick multiple regions here. Now, accounts happen in arbitrary order, but regions, I can actually specify the order they happen in. So if I always want to make sure that Ohio gets provisioned before Oregon, because that's my backup region and I have less traffic there, I can establish that here. And I can do that every time I update, however I want to do it. Again, fault tolerance and all of that. And the other interesting thing here is now I have an opportunity to do a parameter override. So my parameter I originally had set to dev. Now this is going to be my staging account, so I'm going to set it to staging. And that'll be what gets pushed out to each of those regions and accounts within this particular set of stack instances. So I do a refresh here. I've got my current stack, which is from the first run, and now I've got 2 more stacks up. Right? So this is in my Gamma account across those 2 regions. And through the magic of television, I'm going to let those stabilize fairly quickly. I'm going to go down into my Gamma account just so you can see. So this is important too. If I look at the stacks, these stacks actually do show up. Right? So this isn't invisible. This isn't a back-end administrative thing. We're just very visibly doing the right thing here with CloudFormation and with IAM. So you can see those stacks in there. You can kind of drill in and see what sort of events happen in each of them. Okay, so I'm going to do one last set of stacks here. This is going to be for my production environment. delta. And then I'm going to go ahead and select 4 regions here. So we're getting a little bit larger, right? My lower environments, I didn't really want to pay for 4 regions, so I kind of only had a single one, let people play around, and then as I sort of move up towards production, I'm adding more and more regions. Again, I'm doing a little bit of manipulation here to make sure that I deploy in the appropriate order, and I still have no tolerance for failure. This is my production environment, so I'm going to override my parameter again. Okay, and now, through the magic of television, we should get a large number of stacks here. And boop. Okay, so now I've got all of my stacks that I want managed by this stack set. Okay, now keep in mind this is all done through a single template. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to make a change to that template. And I'm going to add another resource. Now the thing is, I don't necessarily want to add that resource everywhere. I really only want to add it into my production environments. And so I have an opportunity here, because I've set different parameter values at each of those different, for each of those different sets of stack instances, I can set up a conditional. And I can tie that conditional to this subnet resource, which means that when I go and deploy this template, let me get this subnet in here. Okay, so I've got the conditional, I've got it tied to it, and it is for environment production. Okay, so now I can go do my update on the stack set. And what the stack set will do now is it'll go and it'll evaluate all of those stacks against the template change and decide which ones it needs to do updates on and which ones it doesn't. And what I'm going to do now is, just to speed things up, is I'm going to increase it to 3 accounts at once. Right? So I'm actually going to be deploying to the first region across all 3 accounts at the same time, just to save myself some time. So obviously, if this is a massive change, you've got a significant number of accounts managed under the stack set, you would want to increase that so you're not doing things in a linear fashion. Okay, so now we've evaluated everything is outdated. We're going to go ahead and apply the new template across all of my stacks. And then I'm going to go in, and I'm going to look at my production environment. And I'm going to check the resources there and validate that that subnet was actually created in my production environment. And then I'm going to go into one of my lower environments and just make sure it wasn't created there. So there you go. So that's kind of one example of how to use stack sets. Obviously, there are lots of different ways to use it based on what you're sort of trying to accomplish. But as you sort of grow a number of accounts and number of regions, it's a very useful tool. Okay, so switching back to my slides. Still 2 sections. I'm going to be able to get through this, Will. It's OK. I want to talk just a little bit about authoring. So CloudFormation template authoring, you're writing in JSON, you're writing in YAML. CloudFormation has a validate API, but all it's doing is validating if it's valid JSON or YAML. So you're going to want to have a good validation environment around your code. You want to treat it as code, right? So hopefully you're checking your code into source control repositories, you're version controlling it. That will allow you to sort of unlock the next level of infrastructure as code, which is to start doing automated testing against it. Static code analysis, unit testing against environments, and all of those types of things that sort of you would do if you were writing an application. So we do actually have sort of a model of this out there. There's a solution available. You can see the link here at the bottom. It'll be in the slides that you get. And it leverages the code suite of tools to actually build out a pipeline like this. So this allows you to check your CloudFormation templates into a code commit repository that will then trigger a code pipeline that will do analysis against those templates using an open source tool called CFN-NAG. It will then provision a stack from that template and run unit tests against that, right? So do some validation against the actual live environment, things that you might not catch in the code, right? Things that might not actually, you might not actually see until integration occurs. And then if everything looks good, if all the tests pass, it will then send a notification out via email to a group of folks that can then approve that template. And once that template's approved, it can be pushed into an S3 bucket and made available to end users or injected into a service catalog or whatever you'd like to do with it. So it's kind of a nice model. Obviously, if you're looking for a suite of tools, we really like the code suite of tools. But you could take this model and sort of inject in the tools that you're using to accomplish something similar. One last plug. There is a relatively new project out there called CFN Lint. Like I said, the CloudFormation validation is really just as a good JSON as a good YAML. This is a linter that actually uses the published CloudFormation resource specification to validate your templates. It's an open source project. I'm one of the folks that kind of sponsors it. We could definitely use more people. We could use more awkward templates to test against it, any number of things. But the cool thing about it is folks have started writing IDE plugins for this. So you can actually take this and plug it into Atom. You can plug it into Visual Studio. And as of this week, you can plug it into Sublime and Vim. Yeah. So take this and use it as a tool in your authoring if you're going to be hand authoring templates. Last theme, serverless. All I really wanted to say here is that CloudFormation, we have customers using CloudFormation to deploy any number of different stacks, everything from your classic LAMP stacks all the way up through complex big data analytics pipelines and into serverless. Now, serverless, the interesting thing about it is there's sort of an ecosystem that's built up around it. And we actually work with the serverless team on something called SAM, which is the serverless application model. And this sits on top of CloudFormation. This actually leverages a CloudFormation feature called transforms and allows you to sort of abstract out how you define your serverless application within your template. So you can focus on just your APIs, just your functions, and not really worry about a lot of sort of the glue stuff in between. And what happens is, as you submit that to CloudFormation, we'll expand that out to the appropriate resources under the covers. And the cool thing is that means that you can actually intersperse SAM models with the rest of CloudFormation. So if there's something that's not within SAM, you can just define that using regular CloudFormation alongside of it. So if you are doing serverless, I would encourage you to check out SAM. But there are any number of frameworks out there that work very well with CloudFormation for deployment. I'm not going to go through all of these, but a lot of these are sort of language-specific. Chalice is one of ours around Python. I think there's a Go one in there as well. But definitely take a look at these frameworks and look at how they interact with CloudFormation. There's a lot of samples out there for it. Giving you a list of links here at the bottom. These are all the things that I talked about. Hopefully you'll get the slide deck because I know these are hard to remember. And that's it. So.